it's kind of hurtful that because we're libertarians openly, that the objectivist movement kind of turns its back on us. There is a columnist for the Washington Post, Michael Gerson, who was an early speechwriter for George W. Bush and started out with the campaign in 1999. And I wrote, I must say, a prescient editorial or op-ed in the New York Times criticizing Bush. The only way you get in the New York Times is to criticize a Republican, and so I cleverly did that. And but I pointed out, I was reading his speeches, which Gerson was writing, and this guy believes in big government. He believes in collectivism. He is like his father, who famously said he just didn't understand this vision thing. Well, of course, what America's all about and what attracted Ayn Rand to America is the vision thing, human liberty. But they didn't like it. And he's much closer to his father than people give him credit for, George W. But his speeches were full of stuff like, we're going to fund religious organizations, we're going to take over control of education, and I said, this is more like Bill Clinton than Ronald Reagan. And Gerson wrote a column recently where he said, Ed Crane's pretty prescient, very insightful guy, because that's exactly, he wrote this thing in '99, and that's exactly what I intended to write in these speeches, to move Bush out of this idea of individualism. And Bush has succeeded beyond his wildest expectations. James Buchanan, the great Nobel laureate economist from George Mason University, had a marvelous editorial on January 1 of 2002 in the Wall Street Journal. And it included this statement: my larger thesis is that classical liberalism cannot secure sufficient public acceptability when its vocal advocates are limited to does-it-work pragmatists. But a vision, an ideal, is necessary. People need something to yearn and struggle for. If the liberal ideal is not there, there will be a vacuum and other ideas will supplant it. Classical liberals have failed singularly in their understanding of this dynamic. I think that's a true statement. And I think the failure is a failure to adopt the philosophy that Ayn Rand articulated, the morality of capitalism, and to defend it. One of the great strategic mistakes that was made, in my view, is the supply-side movement. And some of you have heard me say this before, but the whole idea that Jude Wanniski, who was a big government Democrat, by the way, Jack Kemp, who was the political guru of supply side, Art Laffer and other economists, they explicitly had a philosophy that said, you know what, we shouldn't talk about the proper role of government, we shouldn't talk about cutting out departments and programs, we should just talk about cutting taxes so we can have economic growth. And that's what we're all about. Well, that's not what we're all about. It was a terrible strategic error, and a lot of the best and brightest young minds signed on to the supply side movement. And what Buchanan said, if the liberal ideal is not there, there will be a vacuum. And I think the supply-siders created that vacuum. We have the Club for Growth. Some of my best friends are in the Club for Growth. They're the best people around. But they have signed off on this philosophy. And what it has done has taken liberty out of the equation and replaced it with growth. So economic efficiency and economic growth is beside the point. Liberty will yield you all the economic growth you ever wanted, but you have to be able to defend liberty. And the reason people who supposedly believe in limited government have become so flabby and ineffective in defending it is because they have focused on economic growth and not the politics of liberty. So what that has led to is this philosophical vacuum that's been filled by the neoconservatives. And they are nothing but big government advocates whose roots come from communism, Trotskyist communism. And I think it's interesting that it's nobody's a socialist anymore because we've seen North Korea and South Korea, East Germany, West Germany. I mean, you have to be a moron to think that socialism works. So you have this other deal, as Fred talked about watermelons. So the left and the right, the neoconservative right and the left of the Democratic Party have the same identical philosophy, and I think it's amazing that the media doesn't pick up on it. Here's what Hillary Clinton said on MSNBC last May. When I ask people, what do you think the goals of America are today, people don't have any idea. We don't know what we're trying to achieve, and I think in a life or in a country, you've got to have some goals. Well, that concept that a country needs goals is so alien to what the founders were trying to create here that it's just mind-numbing that you can get away with saying something like that. What America is about is a nation that will protect our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's an individualist concept that is the nature of American greatness. If there is an American greatness, it's not some grandiose plan to build a tunnel from New York to London, as the neocons would have it. It's the idea that you can pursue your own life and your own values. I mean, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It says something radical about, that never existed in the old world. Life is important. And your happiness, therefore, is important. Your happiness is not, as our interns at Cato think, parties every night. It is pursuing your own values, your own goals. If life is important, then you should be able to pursue what you think is important. And that's another difference we may have with some objectivists not understanding the nature of subjectivism. It is people have different values, and thank God they do. And so there's no perfect, Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, ballroom dancing, flower displays, whatever. There's nothing objective about these things. People have different values, and that's a good thing. But you want to protect their right to do that, to pursue what they want. Anyway, Clinton went on to say, she would, rather than an ownership society being one of the few intelligent things Bush has said in 7 years, and she would prefer a we're all in it together society. Now, here is what David Brooks, a leading neoconservative, has said. Americans have discarded their pursuit of national greatness in just about every particular. And how do you describe that goal? Individual ambition and willpower are channeled into the cause of national greatness. And making the nation great, by making the nation great, individuals are able to join their narrow concerns to a larger national project. Ultimately, American purpose can find its voice only in Washington. Now, it's true he wrote that a few years ago. What did he write yesterday in the New York Times? Over the past few decades, the Republican Party is championing a series of reforms designed to devolve power to the individual through tax cuts, private pensions, and medical records. Would that had been true. The temperamental conservative, by which he means himself, does not see a nation composed of individuals who should be given maximum liberty to make choices. Instead, the individual is part of a social organism and thrives only within the attachments to family, community, and nation that precede choice. Now, there's a philosophy that's been tried in the 20th century and found wanting. He calls for, quote, a political age built around authority rather than freedom. And so I bring this all out because, to me, the antidote to this is Ayn Rand's philosophy. You can't have a battle based on utilitarianism against people who have this ideological desire to subsume us all in some giant worldwide project, that the individual is not important. The genius of America is the respect for the dignity of the individual. That was what was so radical about creating this nation. And that is why Ayn Rand was so attracted to America. She felt at home immediately when she came here because she understood that. Well, I think we're in a battle of monumental proportions. I know the people in this room understand that. But the enemy is not cited enough for what they do. There's too much of a battle, as James Buchanan said, about, well, does this program work or that program work? But what is the whole purpose? You know, do we need a goal as a nation? No. The greatness of America is we let people pursue their own values, their own lives. And so the importance of getting the word out about Atlas Shrugged and objectivism has never been greater. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. In your discussion of the old world and the new world, it is a note of some irony that at a time when Nicolas Sarkozy, the new president of France, vacations in New Hampshire and talks about all of his admiration for American entrepreneurship and individualism, we see constant references by Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and John Edwards about having to learn from our European neighbors, having to have a sharing society, having to adopt things like European-style national health care, which is, you know about that health care hotel. You can check in, but you can never check out. Our next speaker is Ed Hudgens. Ed really doesn't need any more introduction. David Kelly, of course, is one of the guiding lights of the Atlas Society. But if Ayn Rand talked about the motor that ran the world, Ed's the motor that's been running this conference. And he has done a darn good job. And both he and David Kelly and the rest of the staff of the Atlas Society deserve a lot of appreciation. Ed.
Thank you very much, John. And I do want to thank Fred Smith and Ed Crane for being here and giving excellent talks. The problem with following Ed Crane is I always agree with him, and so I mean, you know, I don't have a whole lot more to say, but I will have more to say. By the way, speaking of conservatives, the particular article that Robert Bidinato won his award for, the Folio Award, was called "Up from Conservatism," which we have copies of, where he blasted the conservative movement for its inconsistencies, its collectivism, and the like. And he said, of course the Republicans following that philosophy lost elections. What the hell do they expect? So I'm certainly in agreement on the problem with conservatives who are inconsistent in their philosophies, a little bit of freedom here, but we're all members of a collective here, and you see what the results are. Well, I'm closing out this particular part of the conference by discussing the future of objectivism. Now, of course, Atlas Shrugged essentially founded the philosophy of objectivism. But the impact of ideas in any given time in history really depend on how they address actual concerns and challenges that people face at a given time. I mean, you can think of ideas in sort of the abstract and ask questions about, well, what's the justification for limited government and the like, and those are important. But in terms of effectiveness, what counts is what are the felt concerns of people, what are the felt concerns of the public in the public dialogue and the public discussions, and then what can we and what can, as objectivists, and what can objectivist and objectivist-leaning individuals do to provide the ideas that are going to meet those concerns and challenges and say this is the answer. Now, Atlas Shrugged has had two types of influences. First of all,